Glad to say we've got Alain back with us, Alain Tolhurst, chief reporter, podcast host at Politics Home. We finally got there. Technology did its thing, Alain. It cut us off and now it's reconnected us. What a delight to live in the 21st digital age. Let's have a look at this then. Labour's 20 mile an hour speed limit, kind of green light, if you like. This is Louise Hay, the new Transport Secretary, essentially deferring this to local authorities, but with her support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously we've seen it kind of implemented in lots of different places so far. It's moving around the country. I mean, the statistics on what it does in terms of access and stuff are not yet really, it's not necessarily proven so far. So I think it's a bit of a kind of an experiment in these places. And I know it's obviously going to annoy a lot of local drivers, but I guess it's part of this kind of overall. I know that people like to see it's kind of a war on motorists. Obviously, Labour would push back on that, but has been a lot of policies in the last couple of years that have been seen that way. Obviously, things in London, the kind of expansion of things like clean air zones and that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, it's not going to help if you're someone who drives for a living. It's another policy that's probably going to annoy you as you get into your van as you get off work in the morning.
Listen, it's always the same, Alan. I said this about the last government as well. So this is not about Labour, because the Tories did exactly the same thing. There is a set, we want to get more cars off the roads if possible. We don't want cars travelling through. I get it. Nobody wants a rat run outside their front door. We all understand that. So lots of initiatives out there, whether it's ULEZ, whether it's congestion charges, whether it's just, pay to toll roads, whatever it happens to be. But at the same time, all of those governments, Tory or Labour, when the figures come out to say that the car industry has sold more cars this month than ever before, they are jubilant about this. They will say, hey, it's fantastic for our economy.
Yeah, there's a slight sort of dichotomy there. It's a bit like, what's the thing about sort of like NIMBYs, you're not in my backyard. It's a bit like, you can have lots of cars, but don't drive them in my sort of places, I suppose. So yeah, I suppose that element of it is strange. And I think as well, like if you're going to aggressively try and take cars off the road, then you do have to support the other systems that are in place. And the fact is that clearly there's been lots of lack of investment in things like bus services and that sort of stuff. And obviously, similarly, there have been lots of issues on the railways. You've spoken in your shows about kind of the issues around all that kind of stuff as well. So I think that it has to come in tandem. And I think if people will feel like if they've been pushed away from using their car, there has to be a suitable alternative. And I think at the moment, it's not necessarily the second is right there. And I know where I live out in Kent, part of the reason we were disconnected because I keep getting power cuts out here, but also the local bus services are not exactly, if I wanted to try and get to work in Westminster using just public transport alone, I think it would take me, until September when the MPs come back to try and get there at the moment. So.
What part of Kent are you in, by the way, Alan?
So in Tom Tugendhat's constituency, so it's near a town called Westmoreling.
Oh, right, yeah, you're just literally around the corner from me. I didn't realise that. So I share your broadband nightmare scenario, and also the curious nature of southeast trains and all the rest of it. But you're you're absolutely right. When a lot of people getting in touch with us today saying, look, I love a car, I own a car. If there was a better alternative, if I could get a bus or a train with efficiency, without having to change 12 times, then I might consider it. But most people who are getting in touch with us, Alan, are saying, actually, far from increasing bus routes and the like, they're decreasing them, which sort of is a bit weird, really, given all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking as well, like I've got to go to the party conferences later next month, and as one of them I might have to fly because it's A, cheaper, B, quicker, and C, there are issues. And I feel very strange about getting an internal flight within the UK simply because those routes aren't there. Actually, probably the most efficient and quickest and cheapest way would probably be to get in my car and drive. But again, that's not something that's a situation.
Or cycle, of course, but that's quite a big ask to go.
Well, I do have a neighbour who cycles into London every day, but I'm not sure I could do the 50-mile round trip. I think would probably be on me a little bit, I think.
Yeah, well, I have a neighbour who, I'm kidding you not, living in the area you and I live in, who ran into London every day, literally jogged to work. I'm not making. He did it for about half a year. He jogged to work. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, that's like 2 marathons every day. Yeah,
correct. Yeah, he was kind of, he knew what he found little back routes that you wouldn't imagine even existed, but they do when you look for them. But whatever way you slice it, at some point you've got to jog up the old Kent Road, which seems to be a slightly curious look. Let's move to this story. Rachel Reeves, of course, the Labour government, I think they've sort of slightly boxed themselves in a little bit, Alan, on the, we won't raise income tax, we won't raise VAT, we won't raise national insurance, and of course that has left them in this curious position where they're scrambling around finding places where they can raise taxation. There is apparently a consideration that a tax increase in employers' national insurance could be the way ahead. So you're not taxing individuals, but you are taxing companies, and that's going to hit pretty hard, I would imagine.
Yeah, and they're being accused of a bit of kind of sophistry by the Conservatives for essentially saying, you know, at the time they said no increases on national insurance, just blanket both employee and employer. Obviously, they're now saying Darren Jones, Chief Secretary Treasury, Rachel Reeves is number 2 in the Treasury, was saying that there'd be no increases on national insurance employee contributions. So clearly saying that the individual would not have to pay more, but leaving open, as you say, that employers. But actually, if you're trying to increase people in jobs, trying to get people to hire more people, you're making it more expensive to hire each worker by increasing the amount of contributions that the company has to pay in NI. That's obviously a bit of a depressor on hiring more people. So it's an interesting road to go down. But as you say, they kind of box themselves in. You know, the Labour government in 1997 were able to make a similar pledge because the economy was massively improving, and they were going to have extra money to spend regardless. This government is coming in kind of the opposite circumstances, where there's going to be less money because of the difficulties the economy is facing. So they're going to have to find these alternative ways and kind of find cute and kind of clever ways of raising taxes. But it always goes down badly, I think, if you try and do kind of snip at the edges or kind of use kind of language like this about what you're going to do. Eventually, people are going to work out where they're going to be hit on this stuff.
Yeah, and also, bigger, huge corporations can probably, withstand it. They can weather that storm. But I always think of, my local pub, for example, the landlord there, when they changed the sort of pension scheme arrangements some years ago now, was telling me what that meant for, his essentially his profits, which are already challenging. He's in the food and beverage industry. It's always challenging in that world. He has 7 staff and had to take that down to 6 because of that pension thing. Something like this, and you can't keep passing it on, of course. He once told me that if he passed every cost on, a cheeseburger would cost about £47.50. It's just not viable. And frankly, I don't think his cheeseburger's worth £2.50, but that's a whole other story. But it's small businesses that may well get collared by this, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that's obviously often with things like the rise in things like the national living wage and stuff. It's often the smaller businesses that, as you say, it's a larger percentage of their overall outlay is money on staff, as opposed to larger companies that have much larger outlays on other things. And so that cost of the workforce is increasing. And that's, if it increases again, but the actual individual doesn't see any benefit to that in terms of the employee, then I think that could be a tricky one to try and do. But as I said, they've kind of boxed themselves into a tricky situation. If they are to try and fill this black hole that Rachel Reeves keeps talking about, there is going to have to be somewhere that's on the line that's done.
Indeed, so someone is going to get financially hit on this, whatever way you slice it. Final story, Alan. Robert Jenrick, of course, one of the Tory candidates. He was in the studio here just a couple of days ago. He said he would include Boris Johnson in his cabinet if he became Tory leader and returned to power. That, of course, would mean elevating Mr Johnson to the House of Lords and then giving him a cabinet position. It's happened before, of course. See David Cameron for details. But I was looking at this thinking that how does that play, do you think? Because there's obviously a contingent of people that are big, die-hard Boris fans, but I sense there are fewer of them by the day.
Yes, I think you're right. There is a certain caucus within the Conservative Party who thinks that the biggest error they made in the past 10, 20 years is getting rid of Boris Johnson. And for them, nothing will be better until they come in. I mean, Nadine Dorries, for example, is emblematic of that. But as you say, it's a smaller group. And they think, I've been speaking to lots of new MPs for our podcast, and a lot of them talk about, building for the future. The 2019 intake and the 2024 intake, that is the future of the party. The next Prime Minister from the Conservative Party is going to come from probably those 2 intakes, not from reaching back into the past. And obviously, you lose that kind of experience, obviously, of people like Boris Johnson and others who've served in cabinet. But the fact is that if you're going to build for the future, I don't think reminding the voters of probably the most chaotic period of government is the best idea. And I think that for all those kind of candidates to become the Tory leader, I think they need to kind of kick the Boris Johnson habit. I think if they are to kind of lead the party, towards the next election to try and claw back some of those problems, I think, leaning again on the talents of Boris Johnson, whatever they might be, I don't think is necessarily the way forward. No,
I think many Conservatives as well would share that view. Listen, Alan, great to have you on as ever. Thank you. We got there in the end. Alain Tolhurst, Chief Reporter, podcast host at PoliticsHome.